Welcome to the Recruitment Leadership podcast, hosted by Alison Humphries. The Recruitment Leadership podcast is here to help those in the recruitment industry gain awareness and understanding on the hot topics faced by those in the business of hiring people. In each episode, Alison Humphries is joined by a fellow expert to offer professional knowledge, insight and advice on the biggest subjects affecting recruitment businesses. It's the podcast to listen to for recruitment business frontrunners seeking expert information from industry-leading advisors. Welcome to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Alison Humphries of Recruitment Leadership, and today I'm joined by Chris McCann, who is the CEO of SOLIS Academy. Now, let me just scene set and then we'll let Chris introduce himself. I want to draw your attention to a global workforce report recently published by Kelly. It's called Building a Resilient Workforce in the Age of AI. And it shows that half of all senior execs in the UK say that they are not able to unlock the full potential of their workforce, and that 52% say that poor workforce planning is impeding business growth, and that therefore they are missing business opportunities. But also for listeners in the UK, I want to highlight that the UK performs worst in this survey out of 13 developed economies. So for everybody in the recruitment industry who's thinking, yeah, that sounds like me, I'm having difficult challenges with hiring and developing my people at the moment, this is an episode that I know you're going to be interested in. And Chris has kindly got an offer for listeners to this podcast that he's going to reveal towards the end of this. So, Chris, you have a big, long career in recruitment from different angles. Perhaps it's best if I hand over to you to explain your background and your social commitment and how you came to be doing what you're doing now.
Well, thanks for having me. It's funny, actually, my wife still ribs me, funnily enough, for my work background, because I think it's a positive thing. But I've always liked to work. I think I've had most jobs under the sun. There's definitely a commonality in terms of I've always enjoyed probably more of the customer service, particularly the sales roles. But I guess throughout my career, I've always enjoyed helping people as well. I've always been involved in, whether it be personally or professionally, I've always been involved in mentoring and kind of sort out those opportunities. I've always been involved in volunteering as well outside of that. And I did 12 months in a special educational needs school, which had a profound impact on me. But I actually started my proper career, as I call it, in what is known as welfare to work. So I started on a grad scheme and even worked in justice services, which was helping some of the most disadvantaged people in the labour market. So these were people like ex-offenders, single parents. And after probably about 4 or 5 years of doing that in London, I've got an older brother, like many of us, that with a route into recruitment. And so I transitioned over to agency recruitment probably about 10 years ago now. And in terms of my agency background, I worked for 3 different businesses. So I started with Michael Page. I did just over 12 months with them, and then moved to what you would probably call a kind of an owner-operator, small business, and did about another 12 months with them. And then I was headhunted to join a business called Argyle Scott. So they were an international business, but they were setting up in the Middle East. And I guess I'd always been quite intrigued about the startup. I was impressed with the guys that were behind the Redgrave Group at the time, who owned Argyle Scott. And then within about 12 months or so, I think it was probably about 12 months, I was top performer in Argyle Scott, top biller within the first 12 months. We were then acquired by a listed company, the Hydrogen Group, and that was probably back in about 2017. And then I spent 8.5 years with that business and had a fantastic career. I got promoted multiple times. And at the end, when I resigned, I was EMEA CEO. So I was responsible for, I think it's probably about 100 staff. It was 15 million NFI at its peak across both perm, contract, multiple markets. And then I would say, I think it was July last year. That's nearly a year now. Yeah, July last year we had our second baby, and I kind of. There'd been something not right for a little while, and I'd been speaking to my wife, and every time I talked with passion, it was about the stuff that I did at the beginning of my career, that kind of that value-led sort of social purpose stuff. And, when you have children, it does have a big impact on you. And so I've got a wife who also works in recruitment, and she was very supportive. So in this September, with a 2-month-old at home and a 4-year-old, I had full support of my wife. I decided to resign. And the truth of it is, I honestly didn't know what it was that I wanted to do. I knew I needed the change, and I really wanted to just give myself that little bit of time, really, to really think about what it was that I wanted to do next. And it was during a 2 a.m. feed that I had the idea of the SOLIS Academy, which SOLIS is simply an acronym for my 2 children, Isa and Olsen. And I guess in short, I'm sure we'll explore it, but the purpose of the business, as you touched on earlier, is it's really about supporting agencies to find and train the next generation of those rising stars.
Now, Chris, thank you. You know the recruitment environment extremely well. You also, I'm sure, can recognise some of the challenges that I was referring to earlier that Kelly's report dug up.
Yeah.
But there are other providers recruiting and training future recruiters.
Mm-hmm.
Why, in your view, did the world need SOLIS?
Well, look, obviously every business has to solve a problem. And I guess when I think about, my experience and the things that I care about, there's 2 big problems that I've seen throughout my career. If I talk about problem 1, which is kind of what I probably refer to as the supply side, which is the youth unemployment, it's Gen Z, it's about getting our, workforces ready for the future. I'd probably start, probably through a story is the best way to explain it, because about 12, 18 months ago, I got chatting to a bloke at the pool bar, as you do when you're on holiday. And he was telling me about his son, who was 17, Charlie. He was finishing college. He knew that he didn't want to go to university. He was currently holding 2 jobs down. So he was working in retail, and he was working in hospitality. He had a few pals that were in recruitment. He had a next door neighbor that owned a recruitment business. So he'd had interaction. He knew what the industry was about, and he really wanted to go into recruitment. But, his dad was telling me he keeps getting knocked back. He doesn't have a degree, which, is a big bugbear of mine. But it was evident that he had, from listening to his dad, it was, he had the right behaviors, he had the right experience, the transferable skills from retail and hospitality. So I interviewed him, and he was a cracking lad. I could tell he was going to be, a kind of a rising star. But the reality was, in 2023, the business that I was running, we just didn't have the infrastructure to be able to onboard somebody like Charlie. We didn't have the infrastructure from an L&D perspective. And obviously 2023 was particularly challenging. And I probably also couldn't risk, although I had kind of probably around about 80 people at the time, it was 20 teams of 4 people, all had billing managers in there, and I couldn't risk distracting them. And so we had to pass on Charlie. Thankfully, I still mentor him. He's found a fantastic employer who've got a really good approach to rookies, had a fantastic start. He messaged me 2 weeks ago, he'd done his first deal, and he messaged me last week to tell me he'd done his second deal. But the reality is that there's currently 850,000 people in the UK considered NEET, which is not an employment, education, or training. And I think 300,000 of them are unemployed. So, the system is failing lots of Charlies. And, there's an expression I see and use a lot, which is talent is evenly distributed and opportunity is not. So, that certainly had my attention. It got me thinking. And then if I think about the other problem, which is kind of on the demand side and the agency world that I've spent obviously the last 10 years in, when you talked about hiring, training and retaining. I heard Ollie, the guy over from La Fosse, I think he was on a couple of episodes ago, and he talked about, the challenges of getting to enterprise. Only 1% of the 30,000 get to enterprise. And, the fact is that running and growing an agency and running a small business, it's bloody hard work. I know. I've got huge respect for founders and leaders. I've got an older brother that's in that camp. And then when you start looking under the bonnet of, the majority of these agencies, then, you're going to see the same thing. Most founders and leaders they'll be time poor. They'll be spinning multiple plates. They might never have, they might be a typical big biller. They've never ran a business before. And it's likely at the beginning of, inception that they'll also be responsible for large parts of the revenue. So, when I decided that I wanted to run my own business, I started asking, friends like my brother and peers that are all founders and leaders of agencies, what's the biggest challenge that you face? And, the one thing that they said time and time again is that hiring and retaining talent, it's the biggest challenge. And when you look at recruiting, onboarding, upskilling, as well as running the business, it's time consuming, it's extremely expensive, and quite often it's very ineffective. We've seen the industry turnover as 45%. When you look beyond that, it's 70% in rookies. And I also don't think a lot of people really understand, the cost of a bad hire. For a junior recruiter that comes in at about 25K, the maths that we've done, the calculations that we've done, it's probably sitting in the region of sort of 60 to 70K. And that's just financials. You then look at things like, well, what impact is that having on the culture externally and reputationally? What impact is the turnover having on your clients? So then when you start to think, well, what are the options available for these people currently? And you look at the kind of hiring ecosystem in its entirety, you've got most small agencies don't have internal talent. They definitely won't have internal L&D. In-house academies, which I'm a big fan of, they're definitely out of the question. And then so you become dependent on the rec-to-rec market. And so, when I was CO, I did use rec-to-recs. There's definitely a place for them. But, the nature of the beast is they're very candidate-led. So hiring processes are often very rushed. They're often transactional. The amount of times that I would have a report say to me, Chris, we've got to interview this candidate. They're under offer with 3 people. If we don't interview them and hire them in the next 2 days, we'll leave them. And so, if I'm honest, my own personal experience from that sort of interaction was that often the experienced hires were quite often underwhelming. And so I just started to put all of this together really in the time that I had off, and I thought there has to be a better solution. So I looked outside of recruitment. I looked at some of the other industries that I respect. I think technology, when you look at the way that they run their sales processes, I think are light years ahead. And then you look at the fact that they've got other tools such as the hire, train, deploy to deal with these hiring issues. Just sort of thought from my perspective, I thought, well, why can't we have our own version of a hire, train, deploy? So I guess in short, bringing all that together, that's why I decided that there was a space for the SOLIS Academy, and it's to provide the recruitment industry with an alternative model to, hiring, training, and retaining talent. But on the flip side, it's to help more people like Charlie kickstart their career, because there's lots of Charlies out there that need our help.
Okay, thank you. So quite a few big themes there, and ones I'm sure our listeners will recognise. Staff turnover in the recruitment industry, particularly, as you say, with inexperienced hires, is a really big problem. And funnily enough, a business owner in my network said to me recently, well, they're making some money. Isn't that better than nothing? And I said, well, actually, it's not significantly better, because the payback period, if you like, for a new hire has to really be within a year. And as we know, that's the first year is the peak of turnover. So everybody that you hire, you kind of have to regard as, in agency land, you have to regard as actually taking money off your bottom line during the first year.
Yeah.
So getting them properly productive, rather than a mere trickle, is really the difference between success and failure as a business. Yeah. And you mentioned there also something that I think we should remind ourselves of, that every call or meeting or email that a poorly trained person is sending out, unsupervised, uninspected or checked by somebody else, is at risk of losing custom for your business in the future. And so the damage can be really compounded. And we saw a big hike here in the UK. We saw a big hike in basic salaries recently, partly to reflect the big jump in national minimum wage and all the knock-on effects of that. But base salaries are, now coming in about £24,000 a year, which is a lot to take before you're getting any results. So I'm mentioning here in the UK because, Chris, your business is based in the UAE, but you trade all over the world, I understand. Is that right?
Yes, you're right. I'm based out here, but we are predominantly focused, obviously, in the UK.
Yeah, thank you. Now, listeners will have gathered that what the offer of SOLIS Academy is a recruitment and training academy. How does it differ, though, from Rec2Recs and other academy providers? I'm particularly interested in how you go about sourcing and identifying talent, given that you don't take on anyone with more than 12 months experience.
Yeah, that's right. It's specifically focused at that. The definition of rookie, right, which is less than less than 12 months. So, I'll break it down. As I said, there's three key pillars to the business. So you've got the hire, train, and retain. So I'll try and give some kind of context, I guess, to those three areas. So if we look at hire, I mentioned earlier, sorry, that talent is evenly distributed, but the opportunity is not. I think this goes to kind of speak to the assessment piece. It starts right at the beginning. So quite often, the usual metrics that we judge rookies on, such as things like university, as a result of unconscious bias, it means that we're overlooking large amounts of talent, people like Charlie that I mentioned early. So, I think we've put together a really robust and comprehensive assessment process, which is relevant to this cohort of individuals. So we're blending the experience of our talent scouts with obviously technology. We focus particularly on the soft skills assessments. We've heard, the rhetoric from LinkedIn around looking at skills versus experience. So the usual ones that we would expect. So your adaptability, your communication, but we've partnered with a soft skills expert. So I think the other thing is that this is all highly customizable as well. So we can work with agency leaders if they've got a particular area that they want to focus on. We can do that as well. The thing that I like most probably about the whole process is something called an SJT. So again, these are becoming, with the skills gaps and the skills shortages and the issues that we've got around the disconnect between the education supply and the labour market challenges, which, hire, train, deploy and those models seek to fix. There's a big focus around kind of situational judgment tests. So this is a much stronger predictor of somebody's future capability and what their success would be like. I think it's also worth saying we put lots and lots of people through these that have got master's degrees and have absolutely flunked it. And we've got lots of people that have come through it that have got prior work experience, the right skills, the right attitude, and they've aced the test. So I think that's a really strong part of the process. But I also thought about the client as well. When I thought about some of my frustrations as a client in when we were hiring, that client experience, the sending of the CV and knowing that it's at multiple agencies. And I really wanted to work on that client experience as well. So we've invested in a really nice piece of software that embeds the video software as well and video technology as well. So for a big part of us, we talked about, it's really, really hard to assess somebody through a CV when they haven't got a lot of experience. And so a big part of our mantra is that we actually don't believe in CVs. If you look at the facts behind CVs, they're massively prone to bias. They're really time consuming as well. So I sort of touched on it earlier, but I'll be frank. One of the things that really, really boils my blood is this constant requirement for degrees in industries like recruitment. I did a post on LinkedIn out of frustration not that long ago, and it got a lot of attention, and it clearly evoked a lot of emotion in lots and lots of people. And I just think it's, for me, on a social level and a purpose level, it's really, really important to highlight to people that it's impacting the hiring process. This whole thing around needing a degree, it really just needs to stop. So I guess throughout when you look at everything in terms of the soft skills, the SJT, the video interviewing, couple that with the experience of our talent scouts, that assessment process for us is really, really tight. The train piece for me, again, it goes back to that the social purpose piece, really, which is the frustration around the transactional nature of what currently exists. So I have personally invested a lot of money into developing an e-learning platform. And for us, I think the other bit of this is education. Part of those job descriptions that we keep seeing, which is the lure of 100K on target earnings in 12 months, the trips to Vegas in 12 months. I understand that you want to try and attract people, but I would say that that's not working when you look at the fact that we've got 45% turnover and 70% in rookies. I think education for this younger generation is really, really critical. So we've developed the first module in our e-learning platform, and the training process is that everybody has to watch this 12-minute video, and it gives the warts and all. It gives everything that an individual should expect within their first 12 months of recruitment. And so beyond that, we've also got quite a robust program. So it's the SOLIS app, which you go onto the Apple Store. We just had it approved last week. There's 70 courses, but I think to be absolutely critical, it's 20 recruitment specific 101 modules. And then we've underpinned that with 50 bite-sized personal development courses. This really helps with kind of onboarding around well-being, mental health, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But this also obviously really improves that speed to competency that you talked about. You said it being kind of 12 months. So, having this e-learning platform will get people up to speed much quicker. But beyond that as well, I think, e-learning is one way of learning, and not everybody learns the same. So underpinning that, we've got mentoring, we've got monthly masterclasses as well, which will be hosted by myself and other peers within the industry. And that peer-to-peer learning, I think, is really, really vital in this process.
When you're hiring people, and we'll come back in a moment to how you reach out to potential recruitment talent, how much training have they received prior to being placed, if any?
Well, obviously it all depends in terms of how long they've been on the academy. So the idea really is that, when you think about learning anyways, it's kind of like it's a journey, right? It's not a binary activity. So you have they reckon 30% of it is theory and 70% is practical. So the beauty of the app compared to some of the other training that's available is that they can go back to this time and time again. So depending on if they've been obviously on the academy for weeks or maybe a month, or maybe they get hired straight away. The beauty of the app is that it's user-led. So they could have completed the training and they can go back to it. And again, they might forget, and 3 months later, they can go back to it. The app is going to be with them the whole time. So whether they're working from home, whether they're on desk, we're not doing the training in the sense of it has to be user-paced and user-led, as opposed to saying, we're going to put people through for a month. Because if they're not on a desk, and if they're not working, and if they're not able to embed that training while they're doing it, the reality is that most of that's just going to go straight over their head. So
listeners will be thinking, I know, well, how do you identify talent that's right for my business? So, for example, an IT recruiter is looking for a different mix of skills and aptitudes than typically those working in very regulated environments like healthcare recruitment. How do you put that into the mix?
Yeah, well, it's no different in terms of, obviously we are still going to be, this is demand-led service, right? So we are still going to be sitting down, and we're already doing that, sitting down with clients and discussing, the needs of their business. So we will have a bank of job-ready candidates, people that have shown, gone through our assessment process. And at the core of it, I would still challenge and say that, the majority of those requirements for a successful person in recruitment sales would be X, Y, and Z, right? But then obviously, depending on the needs of that individual client, obviously we will, be specific in terms of what it is. So whether or not that be, if they wanted a particular, education, if it was for a technical, if it was for engineering, or if it was something like where they wanted somebody to have a degree, we're not saying no to degrees. We're just saying that we don't think that you have to, and we think that a lot of people are being overlooked. So there's still very much a deep dive into the business. We will still be spending an hour with every single client, asking them what it is that they need and want. And as I touched on earlier, a lot of these, whether it be the video interviews, whether it be the soft skills assessments, the whole process can be customized. So it gives any hiring manager that element of flexibility.
So you are using an objective, recognized psychometric tool to
yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's really, really important. I think consistency. I put my hands up and say I know from even in my previous roles that not everybody was being objectively assessed, and you could interview 2 or 3 people in the same day and they weren't being asked the same question. A lot of them wouldn't have matrices. So I think that consistency, whilst it sounds obvious, is absolutely critical.
And just to go back to my question about tailoring for recruitment in different markets, some training provision that is based on an online platform is criticised in the recruitment sector because it creates a very passive learning experience. And so we have a generation that, have often had their learning presented as entertainment, and they watch something on a screen, and some of it sticks and lots of it doesn't. So what I'm concerned about is training that doesn't have any assessment, or doesn't provide any evidence that people can actually apply that learning appropriately. How do you get around that issue?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've obviously heard, all of the comments about this generation, and I think you'll regularly hear amongst conversations people with experience or see on LinkedIn that leaders are talking about kind of the good old days, and that things have changed. And the reality is, I think as leaders, we've got a responsibility to be looking forward. Gen Z are going to make up 30% of the workforce. It's the first generation that's grown up with access to the internet, and a lot of these young people have finished education during the pandemic. I think the pandemic has highlighted the benefits of, e-learning, the fact that it's kind of mobile friendly, it's bite-sized. Personally, for me, growing up and going through school, I hated analog learning. I would get distracted. It's obviously very interactive, and as you mentioned earlier, they've got things like the gamification, etc., which I think has been proven to increase engagement. But as you said earlier, I think that the assessments are absolutely key. Yeah, I was reviewing some of the training the other day, and I'll be honest, my wife was messaging me. I was not really concentrating, and I got to the end of the module, and I really hadn't taken it in. And I think my observation personally, I've seen lots and lots of training that currently exists in the marketplace, and it often looks at, it'll be people that have maybe been in the industry a bit longer than me, maybe 20, 30 years, and it is very much about, getting on the phone and this, that, and the other. And I just think personally, I think we have to adapt to the way that the world is moving. But I think those assessments are, like you said, are absolutely critical. And so I had to go back, I had to do the module again. And we've got assessments constantly through every single module to ensure that, obviously, user adoption, to make sure that people are passing. But this is also obviously going to generate data and insights for the managers as well. I think the other thing that's really beneficial of this type of learning is that the app will have push notifications. So it keeps people on track in terms of whether or not they're logged in, whether they're on with their learner journey. But the other thing that I would say about some of the other training that's available is that a lot of this is kind of, it's a 4-week period. Ours is 6 months. And people can constantly come back. So, they'll learn once. And I think there's a saying, isn't it, which is that you hear and you forget, you see and you remember, you do and you understand. So I think beyond the assessments, I think the other bit is that follow-up. I think everybody talks about the follow-up in training. And so, I'm not going to sit here and profess that the app is the silver bullet. It's absolutely not. We need to be working in partnership with the agency leaders. There's a call to action at the end of every single module. So the leaders, will be responsible for the coaching, for the on-desk training. We talked earlier about the 30% of learning is theory, and the other 70% is practical. So this is really about giving people a job, a foundation. It's about getting them job ready, and it's about giving and freeing up more time for the agency leaders, that they're not having to do lots and lots of basic training. And again, so that the individuals, like I said, have constantly got something to be able to go back to. But I think the other bit for me that I feel really passionately about is, I really want these people to succeed. I want the agency leaders to succeed. So I'm also going to be giving a lot of my time up as well. I'll be doing monthly follow-ups with the agency leader, but also with the rookie themselves, making sure that they're on point, the monthly masterclasses, etc. But I see this really being a kind of a partnership between myself and obviously the agency.
And listeners who are interested in learning more, there will be a very special time-limited offer, details at the end of this episode, so we'll come back to that. I just want to echo some of the points you were making there about analog style training. And I've seen them and cringed, frankly. Like straight one camera pieces of somebody standing in front of a flip chart or telling anecdotes. And there's a really persistent myth in the recruitment industry that telling stories is the same as training, and or imparting information, even knowledge, is the same as getting people to act on it. And very often, as you say, all those stories are about a face-to-face or telephone-based world. And so can you give us an example, Chris, of how your training reflects the fact that so much of our work is done online now?
Yeah, so I mean, look, there's a big piece around personal brand, obviously. Like you said, is that the world has changed. Even things like, we were looking at some of the stuff the other day, and we always push for face-to-face meetings. And I think digital, and technology, etc., is definitely important. I think it makes us more productive, and I think, even if you look at training generally, having to pay for fees and classrooms and all of those stuff when you can get people from all over the world in one space. I understand why organizations are looking to streamline and to save cost where they can, but I still think that there's a real need for building relationships. So we do obviously explore the fact that technology is prevalent, but I think it's really important that we don't move away from what is recruitment. It's about building relationships, and at the beginning of your career, the candidates, and often they'll become to clients. So we do look at kind of modernizing it in lots of ways, but I still think that I would argue that if you look at recruitment across the world, despite there's a lot of developments with technology, technology and AI and so on, recruitment at its core is still quite, I wouldn't say generic, but consistent, across regions and across markets.
So you also mentioned the importance of involving line managers in the development of their hires that they make from SOLIS Academy. So again, could you give me a specific example of how you do that?
Obviously, we're at the start of our journey. Today is actually the official launch of the business, but we've started working with some companies at the moment, and the idea really is that obviously, unlike a lot of the R2R models, and it's that transactional leaving them at the door, so to speak, we are going to be working with these individuals on a weekly basis in the beginning, and then it will obviously be monthly beyond that period. But I will be sitting down, literally sharing the data, and we have league tables as well to be able to show the line manager, the progress that the individual's making. But also, we're underpinning this offering with 6 months free replacement, so it's within my interest. It's also within obviously the agency leader, but also the rookie's interest as well, to make sure that everything is going to plan and that they're obviously hitting the ground running. So it'll be a combination of data and insights, but also, I've obviously ran agencies for quite some time. I'd like to think I've got a little bit of experience that I could share and support the agency leader, but it really is about that kind of the wraparound service.
And I know that listeners will also be keen to know how does your outreach work? How do you get people to be interested in a career in recruitment when many of them haven't heard of it or aren't aware of the opportunities that exist?
So look, obviously, like the usual routes, and it's not completely different to anybody else, but we've got because I was talking to the CEO of Youth Employment UK about this conversation and how there's the other social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok and so forth, and we were having this conversation about should we be changing the way that we engage, and she said, no, not really. She said people have spoken to her about having a different version of LinkedIn for younger people. I don't think we should be massively adapting the way that we do things. There's a platform such as LinkedIn for the right reason. I think anybody that's looking for work, there still needs to be an innate desire to go and want to work and to be successful, and those individuals will find their way to the right platforms. Otherwise, they're not going to be successful, or you would challenge that they're not going to be successful regardless. But having said that, we are obviously focusing on a cohort of individuals, increasing the talent pool, so that we are doing things slightly differently in the sense that we are obviously reaching out. I mentioned the education piece previously. For us, it's important to give people a full picture, so we're sending out the video and the module as a bit of a taster to second jobbers in particular. We think that's a massive opportunity for us, people that operate in retail, hospitality, sales experience, and not the typical recruiter necessarily. And we're certainly not focusing on graduates, which there are lots of companies that position themselves as graduate experts. So we've got a number of partnerships with things like organizations like Youth Employment UK, Youth Futures, but lots of it is still a traditional route through obviously adverts and education, like I said.
But your aim is to get them interested by giving them the taste of reality rather than the 100K year one. Okay.
But it's also the network, right? It's the network of, obviously there's a huge amount of due diligence on my part, right? Despite the fact that it's a new business, it's also, I've got a responsibility. We're putting young people into organizations. We're not going to be working with everybody. I don't think our offering is right for everybody. So making sure that these organizations are set up for success is obviously really, really important. So for them, the attraction of being engaged in a client network, finding their dream job, but also, like I said, is that we're providing free training for these individuals. So the feedback that we've had from these young people so far has been really, really positive. And a lot of people have highlighted the fact that we're one of the only people that have responded to these people that don't have degrees.
Listeners will be interested to know, I'm sure, bearing in mind that your business is fairly new, what proof of concept can you point to? Can you give us an example of success?
Obviously, as you know, it is the start of the journey. Like I said, today's the official launch. But as you can imagine, I didn't resign from a well-paid job. I had equity in the business that I was in, and with a 2-month-old at home, I didn't take that decision lightly. But I've spent the last 6 months, I think it is, speaking to leaders, Neds like yourself, and in the time that I've had those conversations, not one person has ever said to me, Chris, we don't have a problem with hiring, training, and retaining people. So I think from a validation perspective, perspective, you look at turnover being at 45%. I am very, very confident that the business is solving a problem that needs fixing. But it is very, very early days. But we've had a number of clients, people that have been in my network, people that I've worked with over the years, when they saw what we were doing, said, Chris, I think you're really onto something. I'd like to be involved. And they're now running agencies themselves. So I've got a number of clients that are currently working with, and we've started the mandate in the last couple of weeks. And I've got a number of people that put their hands up and said, we want to hear more. But we've also got on the candidate side of things, we've had a number of candidates that have gone through when we were testing proof of concept, and they've gone into work. And the feedback that we've had from people like Charlie, like I said, is that the training that we've provided compared to training that they've had necessarily on the job or in previous jobs has been fantastic. So it is early days, but the feedback both from the client and the candidate side so far has been really, really positive.
Listeners, I know, will want to be in touch with you, Chris, to get some more detail and perhaps see some samples of what training you're offering. You've already mentioned that you have a 6-month success guarantee on your SOLIS Academy placements. And as I said at the beginning of this episode, you have a special offer for listeners to the Recruitment Leadership podcast. So can you just explain to listeners how to get in touch with you and what that offer is?
Look, I've done a lot of competitor analysis, and I know there's lots of companies out there that are specializing in, the recruitment of grads, for example, and charging kind of 20-25% just for the recruitment fee. So, when we looked at our kind of commercial proposition, we wanted to be really, really clear in terms of what it was that we were doing and why we were doing it. So, we are giving we're finding the person, we're assessing them, we're doing the recruitment and the training part of it all for the same price. It's one fixed fee. It's paid on successful completion. So it really is risk-free to the agency leader. And then, like I said, we've underpinned that with a 6-month free replacement. But obviously, given that it is the launch, we did want to do something a little bit different. So for the first 10 clients that reach out to me on LinkedIn with the title of podcast, instead of giving them 6 months free access to the app, we're going to give their new hires 12 months free access to the app. And I'm actually going to be in Manchester and London all throughout August, meeting clients, people that have already raised their hands with an appetite to work with us. So I'd be really keen to obviously get some face time with those individuals, and obviously look how we can work with them and support obviously their hiring and training and retaining issues.
Okay, thank you so much. So just to be clear again, that's reach out to Chris McCann of SOLIS Academy on LinkedIn and mention the Recruitment Leadership podcast. So thank you very much, Chris. I wish you lots of success with your venture, because I think you're doing a valuable job both for recruitment businesses and for the individuals concerned. And we'll be following your growth and development with interest. So many thanks for being my guest today, Chris McCann.
Thank you.
And I've been Alison Humphries, again, of Recruitment Leadership. And if you'd like to talk about how I can support your business as a non-exec and business advisor, please get in touch with me, alison@recruitmentleadership.co.uk. Many thanks. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Recruitment Leadership podcast. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, review and share so that others can find the podcast too. We really appreciate your support. If you have any questions about the topics covered or wish to find out more about recruitment leadership, please email alison@recruitmentleadership.co.uk, referencing the podcast. We're also on LinkedIn, where you can follow Recruitment Leadership and connect with Alison Humphries. Thank you for listening, and we hope you join us next time for another episode of the Recruitment Leadership podcast.